The cursor blinked at me like a warning light. 47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline. If I pressed send, I'd set off a legal bomb worth over $2 million. My name is Nora Whitfield, 42, Director of Platform Engineering at Arcturus Technologies in Austin, Texas. For 12 years, I'd built their systems, trained their teams, stayed late to solve crises no one else could touch. They called me reliable. Today, that word felt like a bruise. I scrolled through the letter again. I hereby decline the offered position and invoke Section 12.c of my employment agreement. Simple, precise, deadly. I hit send. The whoosh sounded like a gunshot. Outside my glass office, the floor was empty, lights dimmed to a quiet blue. My reflection stared back, hair pulled tight, eyes steady, hands no longer shaking. For the first time in days, I felt control click back into place. My phone rang almost instantly. Nora, this is Amanda Russo from Legal. Calm voice, forced. I've just read your email. You're invoking Section 12.c. That's right. A beat of silence. Could you send me a copy of your contract already sent? I heard papers shuffling. Then a muffled voice in the background male. Urgent. Low. Probably Ethan Cross, the CEO's son. The one who'd called me into his office 3 days ago to announce that my salary would be cut in half to save budget. Amanda came back on the line. Her tone had changed. We'll need to meet Monday morning. The call ended. I stared at the faint city lights across the river, the Colorado glinting under them. Somewhere upstairs, Ethan was probably realizing what Section 12C really meant: 3 years' salary, full equity vesting, benefits. Everything his cost-cutting move had just triggered. The air felt heavier now, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I shut off my monitor, slid the printed contract into my bag, and stood. They thought they'd backed me into a corner, but the thing about corners, if you know where the walls meet, you can push back. 3 days earlier, it had started with a single sentence: we need to save budget. Nora. 3 days earlier, I'd walked into conference room B on the 22nd floor, thinking we were about to discuss the Henderson project timeline. The agenda email had said strategic review, nothing about restructuring. The glass walls made the room look bigger than it was. Downtown Austin shimmered outside, cranes and traffic glinting in the sun. Inside, the air felt still. Heavy. Ethan Cross, the CEO's son, stood near the window in his tailored navy suit. He was 32. Maybe. All confidence and charm, his father's posture, without his father's substance. Thanks for coming in. Nora, he began, smiling like we were about to talk bonuses. I'll get right to it. We're making some tough calls to keep Arcturus agile. Across the table sat Patricia from HR. Her tablet poised, eyes soft with rehearsed empathy. Ethan flipped a document around. Effective next month. Your role will transition to senior engineer. Same projects, same team, just a leaner structure. Salary will adjust accordingly. Adjust. I repeated. By how much? He exhaled, like the number was an inconvenience, from 140 to 85. The words hit clean and cold, like a scalpel, a 40% cut. Patricia spoke softly. This isn't about performance. Nora, it's about alignment and budget. Everyone's making sacrifices. Everyone. That word always meant someone else's comfort at your expense. Ethan added, we're confident you'll see this as an opportunity to focus on what you do best: coding, not managing. I looked at the document. 1 page, printed this morning. The ink still smelled new. I'd built the system that carried their revenue streams, trained every engineer under me. Written code still running in production from 6 years ago. Now they were stripping away the title and half the pay. Calling it focus. I didn't let my face change. I set my pen down deliberately. Can I get this offer in writing? Patricia blinked. Of course, we'll send it by end of day. Good, I said, standing. I'll need time to review my current contract. Ethan's smile wavered, just a fraction. He hadn't expected me to remember I had one. I left the glass room with my coffee untouched and the sun burning across the skyline. I locked my office door behind me and let the click settle in the silence. The hum of servers from the engineering floor below was faint but steady, like a heartbeat I could still trust. On my desk, the restructured offer lay exactly where I'd dropped it. The paper looked thin, flimsy. I slid it aside and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one labeled Personal, Arcturus. Inside were tax forms, patent filings, and a single blue folder I hadn't touched in years. The paper inside smelled faintly of toner and coffee. At the top of the first page, employment agreement, Nora Whitfield, Director of Platform Engineering. 4 signatures at the bottom. One of them was Michael Torres, the company's founder and original CEO, the man who had believed loyalty deserved to be protected in writing. I turned each page carefully, reading every clause until I found it page 7, section 12.c, constructive dismissal. In the event that the employee's role, title, compensation, or material responsibilities are substantially diminished without written consent, such action shall be deemed constructive dismissal. In such cases, the employee shall be entitled to severance compensation equal to 3 years of base salary at the time of dismissal, immediate vesting of all equity grants, and continuation of health benefits for 36 months. I read it again and again. Then I sat back in my chair, staring at the faint blue glow from my monitor. 3 years of salary, $420,000. Unvested equity, 70,000 shares at $32 a share, roughly $2.4 million in total. A clause written when the company was still young, meant to keep people like me from walking out when competitors came calling. And now, ironically, it was the one thing keeping me from being erased. I took out my phone and photographed every page, front and back, making sure the signatures were clear. Then I uploaded copies to a private cloud, a USB drive, and my external backup. For the first time all day, my hands were steady. Hands. The fear that had followed me since that meeting began to fade. In its place came something quieter, sharper certainty. The next morning, Austin was still wet from a night of rain, the streets slick and shining. I parked outside a narrow brick building on West 6th Street, where David Kellerman kept his practice. He'd handled my house closing years ago steady, methodical, the kind of lawyer who read every comma twice before he signed anything. His office smelled like paper and coffee, the kind that had been sitting on the warmer since dawn. David looked up from his desk, glasses halfway down his nose. "Nora," he said, standing to shake my hand. "You mentioned something about a clause." I laid the blue folder on his desk and passed him a printed copy of the demotion offer. He read quietly, flipping between the 2 documents, lips pressed in a thin line. When he reached page 7 of the contract, his eyebrows lifted slightly. He read section 12C again, then leaned back. "This," he said finally, tapping the paragraph with his pen, "is ironclad. Whoever wrote this knew exactly what they were doing." "Michael Torres." I said, "The original CEO. That explains it." He smiled faintly. "They can call it restructuring all they want. A demotion with a 40% pay cut meets every definition of constructive dismissal." For a moment, I didn't speak. Hearing him say it out loud steadied something in me. David closed the folder. "Here's what we'll do. You'll respond in writing calm, professional, decline the new position, invoke section 12.c, and request calculation of severance under the contract. No emotion. No argument. Let the document speak for you." He pulled a yellow legal pad closer and began drafting the letter in neat, block handwriting. "Don't negotiate. Don't justify. They'll try to rattle you. Don't take the bait." I nodded, watching the words form, deliberate and clean. The anger that had kept me awake for 2 nights began to drain away, replaced by focus. By the time he finished, the rain had stopped outside. I folded the draft carefully and slipped it into my bag. No confrontation, no raised voices, just paper, ink, and time. By Friday afternoon, the building was thinning out, desks were emptying. jackets slung over chairs, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. My inbox had filled with meeting invites, expense reminders, and one polite email from HR at 9:17 a.m. Just checking if you've had time to review the offer. Nora, we'll need your response by 5. I'd spent the morning tightening the draft David had written, line by line, making sure every word matched the language of the contract exactly. Constructive dismissal, Section 12.c. 3 years of salary. Words that once felt theoretical now had weight. At 4:40 p.m., the office was almost silent. Patricia's laugh echoed faintly from the kitchen, the kind of brightness people use when they know bad news is coming for someone else. I reread the email one last time. Subject, response to employment offer. The letter was attached as a PDF. At 4:47, I pressed send. The sound of the whoosh filled the room, small, sharp, final. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, at 5:03, my phone buzzed. Received. Thank you, Nora. We'll review and respond next week. That was it. I sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at the message. I had followed every rule, met every deadline. Still, a part of me expected someone to burst through the door and demand an explanation, to tell me I'd misunderstood the contract, that I was wrong to believe words could protect me. No one came. I packed my laptop, turned off the lights, and walked out into the humid Austin evening. The air smelled of rain and asphalt. That weekend, I barely slept. I read the contract 6 more times, tracing each line with my finger like a prayer. I looked up case law on constructive dismissal until my eyes blurred. Every precedent said the same thing if the clause was explicit. It stood. Monday morning at 8:57, my phone rang. The caller ID read Amanda Russo, General Counsel. Her voice was measured, polite. Nora, we've reviewed your letter. We'll need to meet this afternoon. The storm had noticed. The conference room they chose on Monday morning faced the river. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, I could see the water moving slow under the bridges, sunlight flashing off the current. It looked peaceful, which only made the tension sharper. Amanda was already seated when I arrived, her folder neatly stacked beside a tablet. Next to her sat a man I didn't recognize, gray hair. Perfect suit. Expression like polished steel. Nora, Amanda said. This is Roger Piton, outside counsel for Arcturus. He stood to shake my hand. His grip was firm, not friendly. We sat. Across from me, Ethan Cross leaned back in his chair, trying to project ease. The same confidence he'd worn in the meeting where he'd cut my salary now looked thinner, like fabric stretched too tight. Roger adjusted his glasses. Ms. Whitfield, we've reviewed your employment agreement. Section 12C does mention constructive dismissal, but we believe there's room for interpretation regarding whether this transition qualifies. He said transition like it was a favor. Ethan nodded. We want to handle this respectfully. Nora, we're offering 6 months' salary as severance, plus continued vesting through the end of the year, about 3,000 shares. I opened the folder in front of me. The clause defines constructive dismissal as any substantial diminishment of role, title, or compensation. 40% reduction and loss of directorial title meet all 3 conditions. Roger smiled slightly. The term substantial isn't quantified. We could argue it's qualified by context. I interrupted. Page 7, line 3. It lists compensation and title as triggers independently. That's not interpretation, that's definition. The smile disappeared. Amanda watched us quietly, her pen motionless over her notebook. Ethan leaned forward. Look, Nora, we don't want a legal battle. Let's be pragmatic. We can increase the offer 12 months' salary, vesting through next June. I closed the folder carefully. My response hasn't changed. The sound of the river pressed faintly against the glass. For a moment, no one spoke. Ethan's fingers tapped the table once, twice, then he stood. We'll be in touch. Outside, the Texas heat hit like a wall. I walked toward my car, feeling none of it. The line between anger and clarity had vanished. 2 days after the meeting with counsel, I was reviewing a code deployment plan when a soft knock sounded on my office door. Ethan Cross stood there, hands in his pockets. No smile this time. "Got a minute?" he asked. I gestured toward the chair across from me. He closed the door before sitting down first. The silence that followed felt heavier than the air conditioning hum. "I wanted to speak off the record," he began. His tone had lost the polish. "This situation with your contract, it's complicated. The severance you're claiming would hit our quarterly financials. It could jeopardize a funding round we're about to close." I folded my hands, waiting. He leaned forward. "Look, I get it. You're standing on principle. But maybe we can find middle ground, something fair." "Fair," I repeated. "You cut my salary by almost half and called it a restructuring." "That wasn't personal," he said quickly. "We had to make cuts somewhere. My father expects results. Investors are watching. This payout, it could make us look unstable." I let the words hang. The desperation underneath his calm voice was new. "I'm asking you, Nora," he said, softer now. "Be reasonable." The sentence echoed off the glass. For months, I'd been the reasonable one, absorbing deadlines, covering gaps, staying silent while others took credit. I looked at him and saw what this was: not concern for me, but fear for himself. "Reason," I said quietly, "is written down." He blinked. "What in the contract?" I said. "Page 7, section 12.c. That's reason." For the first time, he had no quick response. He stood, smoothing his jacket as if the conversation had gone the way he intended. "All right," he said finally. "We'll proceed formally." Then, when he left, I watched him through the glass wall as he walked toward the executive wing. His shoulders were tight, his phone already in hand. For years, I'd feared losing my position, my stability, my place. But that fear was gone now. The only people afraid were upstairs. By Friday morning, the sky over Austin was washed pale gray, the kind of light that flattens everything. I walked into the same conference room overlooking the river. The air inside was cool, still, almost reverent. Amanda Russo sat at the head of the table, flanked by Roger Peaton and Ethan Cross. Patricia from HR took her usual quiet seat in the corner, tablet ready. This time, there were no smiles, no attempts at small talk. Roger's briefcase was open, filled with documents marked by colored tabs. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Ms. Whitfield," he began, his voice lower than before. "Thank you for meeting with us again." He cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "We've completed a thorough review of your employment agreement and the relevant case law. While there are areas that could, theoretically, be debated, the practical risk of litigation is considerable." He didn't finish the sentence. Amanda took over, her tone even, professional. "After consulting with the board and outside counsel, Arcturus is prepared to fully comply with the terms of section 12.c. Ethan's jaw tightened. His fingers drummed once on the table before going still. Amanda continued. "You'll receive 3 years of base salary, $420,000 immediate vesting of all 70,000 shares, and continuation of health benefits for 36 months. She slid a document across the table. "We'd ask for a standard separation agreement confidentiality, mutual non-disparagement, and release of claims." I read the summary page, tracing each clause with my finger. The language was clean, almost clinical. I looked up. 2 adjustments. I said, "Payment within 30 days, not 45, and vesting effective upon signing, not on the separation date." Roger glanced at Amanda, then nodded. "Those are acceptable." The pen Amanda handed me was heavier than it looked, as I signed my name. The faint scratch of ink on paper filled the room. Across the table, Ethan stared out toward the river. Expression blank, he didn't look at me again. When it was done, I closed the folder, placed the pen neatly beside it, and stood. The fight was over, not with raised voices or broken doors, but with sentences that couldn't be argued. That afternoon, I returned to my office for the last time. The room felt smaller than it had a week ago, bare walls. The faint smell of dust and coffee. I stood by the window for a moment, watching the slow stream of cars along the riverfront, then turned to the shelves. I packed quietly. A few technical manuals, framed photos from old conferences, a dying pothos plant that had somehow survived 3 reorgs. My mug, the one that said "World's Okayest Engineer," went into the box last. I smiled when I wrapped it in a spare hoodie. When I stepped out onto the engineering floor, conversations paused. A few of my team members looked up, uncertain whether to say anything. I set the box down and smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you," I said. "Keep the system stable. Take care of each other." Yolanda, my former peer, came forward and hugged me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't know the details. "It's all right," I said. It worked out. By the end of the day, my badge stopped beeping green. I left it on my desk and walked out into the bright Texas heat. 2 weeks later, the deposit hit my account $420,000 exactly. 3 years of salary in one transfer. My shareholder portal updated the same day, 70,000 shares vested, valued just over $2 million. The numbers didn't make me smile as much as the confirmation itself, a promise honored, word for word. I spent that weekend in quiet celebration. No champagne, no big gestures, just sleep, music, and the first evening in months without checking my inbox. Through the industry network, I heard Arcturus missed its funding round. Investors had noticed the severance line in the quarterly report. 2 senior directors resigned. Ethan stepped down shortly after. No announcement, no farewell memo. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. The blue folder stayed on my shelf at home, neatly labeled and untouched. Every once in a while, I'd glance at it, reminder of the day I stopped asking for fairness and started defining it myself. 3 months later, the skyline of Austin looked different from the other side of the river. My new office sat on the 5th floor of a renovated warehouse, sunlight pouring through the high windows, the hum of clean energy prototypes replacing the old rhythm of server fans. I'd joined Solvin Renewables as vice president of engineering, a smaller company. Leaner, but alive in a way Arcturus hadn't been in years. Here, people argued over ideas, not egos. On my first morning, the CEO had greeted me with a firm handshake and a simple sentence: "We're building something that lasts." At my desk, there was only one personal object, a black frame holding a single page from my old contract, Section 12.C, printed in full. The edges were slightly worn from where I'd run my thumb across it too many times, rereading the lines that had once felt like salvation. Sometimes, when I worked late, I'd glance at it and think about how close I'd come to signing away my own worth out of habit. How easily years of loyalty could be turned into leverage against you if you didn't know the language protecting you. I never spoke publicly about what happened at Arcturus. The separation agreement's confidentiality clause saw to that. But even if it hadn't, I had nothing left to say. Silence had already said everything. That spring, Solvin closed its first major partnership deal. I walked out to the balcony overlooking the river, the same water that flowed past the glass tower where I'd once been told to be reasonable. The wind carried the sound of construction cranes, the smell of rain, the hum of a city always rebuilding itself. I stood there for a long time, feeling both smaller and freer than I'd ever been. The contract in the frame didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like proof that clarity, once earned, could never be taken away.